Welcome back to the 17th online episode of Peacetime, hosted on alternating Sunday mornings by Peace Point and on alternating Thursday evenings by Dhammakaya International Meditation Center, with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from Dhammakaya International Meditation Center in Azusa, California. Today's session will be about an hour and 10 minutes long and will consist of a 25-minute talk and 20 minutes of meditation, finishing up with 25 minutes of conclusion and news updates. Last time you saw me, we looked at 7 myths about generosity. The topic for the Dhamma talk today will be the art of compassion. Again, this session I would encourage you to send in any questions you have by emailing me at peacetime.questions@gmail.com so that I can have a shot at answering them next time round. The topic of compassion is one which seems to be trending in society, perhaps because people are fed up with the opposite: divisiveness, anger, fear, and all the other problems concerning selfishness. It is probably no surprise, therefore, that compassion is a subject where nearly every religion has a message. Not long ago, I was on an interreligious panel, where I was pretty much the last person to speak, and after listening to representatives from nearly every Abrahamic religion, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, I found that they had already said pretty much everything I had prepared to say. In fact, amongst all the characteristics that make God worthy of worship in those religions, compassion and mercy are up there with the most frequently mentioned in the verses of praise. It is like God is the blueprint for compassion in those religions. But what I found interesting, even after they said everything they were going to say, is that in Buddhism there are still a lot of aspects of compassion overlooked by other religions. In Buddhism, compassion is valued simply as an ethical or a character quality to be developed in life. No matter where you think it's come from or who is exemplifying it, compassion is regarded as useful to the person who behaves compassionately, as it somehow brings out the humanity in people. For Buddhism, even if you start out without much of it, you have the possibility of becoming more compassionate by cultivating certain spiritual practices in life. Even if you start out as a fairly mean person, there is hope for you because you can become more compassionate by spiritual formation. In Buddhism, compassion is termed karuna, both in Pali and Sanskrit, and sometimes the term piyo, which means endearing, is used too. It is a quality important in all schools of Buddhism. Compassion has acquired an increasingly important place in the Buddhist pantheon of virtues as Buddhism progressed down through history. In a previous session, we mentioned how love is divided into 4 different facets in the Bible, whether it be storge, philia, agape, or eros. And in Buddhism, there is definitely a clear effort to give compassion different shades of meaning too. So having just said that the divine aspect is lacking from the Buddhist understanding of compassion, that is not entirely accurate, because most of the words used to describe compassion in Buddhism are to do with qualities of godliness. Those compassion qualities that a person might aspire to are qualities that will make you more of a complete person. Even though you are still in this world, but if you are a compassionate person, it's like you already have 1 foot in the heavenly realm. So, compassion is characterized in terms of what's known as the 4 divine abidings. These can be understood simply in terms of different aspects of the values necessary in parenthood, the qualities of being a good parent. So for anyone listening in who is a parent or is planning to be a parent, then this is really one of the most serious testing grounds for the quality of compassion, where you can really cultivate compassion to the full. 4 aspects or stages of compassion are described: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, and I've put in the Indian words on the slide for those who are interested. They're seen as the qualities a parent needs to have as their child grows through different stages of maturity. So starting with a very young child, first of all, the first quality of compassion the parent needs to have, if your toddler is somehow suffering, crying, and in pain, is to empathize or feel that suffering for yourself. The sense of empathy which you have for that child's suffering, even if you may or may not be able to take away that suffering yet, as of course you'd want to do as a parent, that is where this whole process of development of compassion really starts. For this reason, psychopaths would not make very good parents. Really, compassion should not be restricted just to your children, but if you want to broaden the scope of this, it is relevant to anyone who you might see suffering. Simply to feel that suffering is the first way in which you can awaken compassion. In this particular case, compassion is known as loving kindness. The word metta or maitri are the Indian words associated with that in the Indian context. And try to remember those words because we're going to come back to them later for a special form of meditation where you can actually learn about and practice it. So this is where we get that intentionality. Some people overlook the quality of good intention because it doesn't seem to do anything. But it is actually where compassion starts, the goodwill you project towards others who you see suffering. I should add that suffering doesn't just mean physical pain, but includes any form of mental suffering, dysphoria, or sense of unease. In the scriptures, it's sometimes described as the feeling generated by trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. From there you come to the next stage of your child's maturity, where as a parent you need to have compassion proper, or karuna, as it's known in the traditional context. For this, you not only feel their suffering, but you must also jump in to try to remove the cause of the suffering. You recognize suffering, but you also feel compelled to remove the cause of the suffering. So if you're able to do anything to remove the cause of pain when you see a person suffering, then that would be seen not only as intending to be compassionate, but as a really proactive form of compassion, which you would ideally need to have as a parent who needs to constantly be picking up your children when they fall down, or making sure they're healed when they get sick. If you habitually respond in a compassionate way like this, it becomes a part of your character. Really, parenting is a very powerful practice for learning compassion. In fact, if you don't manage to learn it, then as a parent you will end up with a major headache. Next comes sympathetic joy or mudita, as it's known in the traditional context. This is sometimes described as a sort of compassion where a parent sees that their child has grown up a little bit more and is starting to have achievements of their own. So often you see parents leaning on the garden fence, bragging to their neighbors about my little Jimmy, who has excelled in his piano playing, and the parent is so proud that you might be mistaken for thinking they are talking about their own piano playing. But really, it's a good sign. It's not some sort of arrogance on the parent's part, because the fact they're so integrally linked to the achievements of their child, who has grown up to the point that they're starting to have their own successes, that it's commendable that they're not jealous of their child, but they are glad for them. Really, that gladness reflects well on them as a parent, because it is a sort of big-heartedness and is the next stage of development of compassion, which you can compare to the next stage up for children as they are maturing. Next comes equanimity, which is known as upekha in the traditional context. Equanimity may sound like an odd quality to put in this family of values connected with compassion, because sometimes it means doing nothing. But if you allow me to elaborate further, sometimes it is like when you are a parent to children who have already grown up. You're still their parent, right? Since you don't stop being their parent and disown them when they finally leave you with your empty nest. But sometimes when they require from you has changed dramatically from what they needed when they were in short pants, when you were still following them around the house folding up their discarded socks or whatever. If you are still folding up their socks when they're grown up, married and have a home and family of their own, they would probably be justified in resenting your interference. So at this stage, what can you do as a parent to show your compassion for your child? Because they're not letting you do anything to help them anymore. Well, sometimes the answer is just be there for them. Actually, you're not doing anything for them, but you're making yourself available. They know where to find you if they need your help. But apart from that, you need to trust their better judgment. So, trusting that you've brought them up right, they've now got their own lives, but if they do need your help, probably to sit the grandchildren, they know where to find you. And that is how compassion actually matures into a slightly more trusting aspect, although it's not so proactive as the previous sorts of compassion I've described. So all four of these together are seen as comprising compassion within the system I'll be talking about here. So even if you're not a parent, these values are still relevant to any sort of situation where you're caring for others in life. Sometimes you need to step in and do something, sometimes quickly if they're really hurting. But on other occasions you need to stand back and wait for the appropriate time for an intervention. Talking about where the artfulness of compassion comes in, sometimes it's the decision whether to step in or to stand back that makes it difficult for us. If we get it wrong, then we end up feeling like, even after all I've done, you're still not thanking me for it. What did I do wrong, or are you just ungrateful? Although we might expect developing compassion would require selfless, grand gestures on our behalf, there's also a place for informal, moment-to-moment practices throughout the day. For example, you could notice at what times throughout the day compassion comes easily or spontaneously for you. For example, what are your reactions when you're watching the evening news? You could notice when you resist acknowledging or being with your own or others' suffering throughout the day. For example, when passing someone on the street who's asking for money, or an extended family member who's going through difficulties. Throughout the day, you could notice when you judge or deny suffering. For example, when you say that it doesn't count or it's insignificant compared to someone else's suffering or something else going on in the world. We often notice our own or others' suffering, but are quick to dismiss it and thus do not allow ourselves to be emotionally touched or moved by the suffering, which is an important part of developing loving kindness. This sort of awareness of the presence or absence of compassion can provide some valuable information to you. So the next time you're standing in line at the grocery store, instead of looking down at your phone or watching how quickly surrounding lines are moving, take a moment to consider the common humanity of the people who made your grocery trip possible, the people who grew and transported the food, who stocked the shelves, or even the cashier who's about to serve you. Perhaps you could take a moment of appreciation for each of them. If you choose, this could be the opportunity to acknowledge the interdependence that surrounds us, because our lives, even simple trips to the grocery, rely on countless others. Similarly, ordinary acts of compassion might involve holding a door open for someone, visiting someone recently bereaved, or holding back from using your privilege to exploit the weak. Compassion may mean making yourself vulnerable, and don't overlook endearingness, which generally means keeping up a good level of manners, helpfulness, or service. If you were to be able to cultivate compassion or loving kindness, are there some benefits to this? Well, traditionally there are 10 benefits that come to a person who is able to practice meditation based on compassion. What we notice is that all 10 of these are benefits that come to you as the practitioner of compassion. Firstly, you sleep better. If anyone listening in has sleep problems, then this could be the reason. If you're not sleeping well, it may be because you have that sense of antagonism towards others. Usually the opposite of compassion is anger or an inability to forgive other people. Those are the sort of things that really keep people awake at night, or at least leave them tossing and turning in their sleep. Secondly, when you wake up, you still feel at ease. Do you know how much sleep the average person needs? Are there any scientists listening in? Well, without relying too much on empirical knowledge, I'm sure you'd agree the answer is half an hour more. Because for most people, when they wake up, they want to go back to sleep for another half an hour. But apparently, if you have a lot of compassion, when you wake up, you feel refreshed and ready to face the day immediately. The third thing, which is good news for anyone who suffers from nightmares, is that bad dreams are something you protect yourself from by having more compassion. A fourth thing is that other people will like you more if you are a compassionate person. It is a little bit like what goes around comes around. If you have a nice smiley face towards other people, then other people will smile back at you. A fifth thing is that not only will people be nice to you, but non-humans as well. So you will be safe from attack by wild animals if you are ever out on the trail. If you are not averse to the mention of celestial realms, traditionally, as a compassionate person, a sixth benefit is that you will be looked upon favorably by angels. Maybe your personal angel who finds you parking spaces. No, I'm just joking. A seventh benefit as a compassionate person is that you will be less likely to be harmed by fire, poison, or weapons. I'm not quite sure how to explain this in a vaguely scientific way, but when you die, it will be expected that as a compassionate person, you would tend to die in a slightly more dignified way. If you are a meditator, then an eighth benefit is that loving kindness practice will help you focus your mind more quickly as you meditate. The loving kindness obviously helps you to have less negativity for your mind to get caught up with, whether it be anger or a lack of forgiveness. A ninth benefit is that you will have a better and more radiant complexion. I think probably a better word for this would be that you have a good aura. You notice that some people light up the room, so to speak, when they come into it, and it would tend to be the same sort of people who are compassionate by nature. And last but not least, when it comes to the time for you to die, as a compassionate person, you would tend to have a good death, which means that you would not be subject to fear as you are dying. So these are all things that you might say are self-serving about compassion, but which may serve as a motivation to become a more compassionate person yourself. The question is, where does this compassion come from? Where can we find it? Is there an organ in the body that contains a lot of compassion, which we can maybe do our exercises to develop more? Is it a physical thing? Where does this love come from? Maybe the heart? After all, some people who are very angry have heart conditions. Well, what I'm going to propose to you is that the source of compassion lies on a deeper level. And that is why at this point I need to talk more about how we get the compassion. The technical name for any sort of training in a religious context is formation. Apart from the everyday practices I've already mentioned and some of the selfless examples I'll mention later, meditation on loving kindness is the most accessible formation by which you can become a more compassionate person. Even if you didn't start out compassionate in the first place, sometimes we tend to downplay the role of intentionality in changing the world for the better, since models like the 12-step program say that you can act your way into right thinking, but you cannot think your way into right action. But here, with the cultivation of compassion, it would appear that the roots of the behavior lie in skillful intentions such as empathy for the suffering of others in a way that inspires you to want to help them. The intention is actually where we start. Later on, the strength will come to put that compassionate intention into action. So, formation of compassion does actually start with something called the mind. which I shall explain in just a moment, is something more to do with the qualities of our awareness or our attention, rather than our brain. And the way it's cultivated is through a meditation-like practice to harness the aspect of compassion. So let me spend a few moments to describe how this works. I should start by saying that loving kindness meditation is not intended as an alternative or replacement for meditation proper. That is, the sort of meditation where you focus your mind at the center. But loving kindness meditation can be performed as a supplement either before or after your time of regular meditation. If you practice loving kindness meditation for a few minutes before your normal practice, it will soften the mind, creating the feeling of spaciousness and make progress in your regular meditation more fruitful. If you practice loving kindness meditation after your regular meditation practice, it will spread the positivity generated as a result of your meditation for the benefit of all other living beings. Supposing you were doing your regular meditation by focusing at your center, you would leave yourself 5 extra minutes of meditation at the end of your allotted meditation time to practice loving kindness meditation. You start by allowing the mind to rest gently at the center of the body until it is free of thought. Only using a minimal effort to rest the mind at the center of the body, you will notice that the mind begins to expand, as you can see on the slide, as a sphere outwards, spreading the well-being arising as a result of the meditation to all beings within its compass. Allow the sphere to spread until it encompasses your whole body, and at that point you would silently entertain the wish that you be well and happy and free from suffering. Then you would allow the sphere to spread until it encompasses the whole room where you are sitting. Again, you would silently entertain the wish that all sentient beings in the room be well and happy and free from suffering. Then you continue expanding the loving kindness and making the same wish for increasingly larger geographic areas around you until you reach the whole of the planet and the universe. And if you can't remember all this, don't worry, because I will include a guided loving kindness meditation at the end of today's meditation. Speaking of which, at this time we settle ourselves for some meditation, and if you'd like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself now as you listen to my guidance. So we start by settling ourselves down into a comfortable position for meditation, closing our eyes as gently as possible, slowing ourselves down by breathing deeply and taking a few moments to check down through the whole of our body, to relax each and every muscle as we go, all the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes, relaxing all the tension of the muscles in between. The ideal posture for our meditation is a position of poise, where the whole of our body is fairly upright, while being comfortable, almost as if there were a thread running from the top of our head all the way down through our back, almost as if we were suspended by that thread, with our body leaning slightly forwards and upwards, extending the back, allowing us to breathe easily, and also making it easier to find the center of our body. Inside our mind, we reconnect with the best of our meditation, not with particular experiences that we've had, but with what we can remember of the feeling that accompanied that, a sense of joy or well-being that accompanied the best of our meditation, by conjuring up the same feeling all over again. Somehow it helps us to return to that same place in our meditation again, with a sense of lightness, a sense of the whole of our body being filled with happiness and joy. And imagine that inside our body is just an empty space, a hollow cavity, without any organs or tissues, muscles or bones. Or alternatively, as if our whole body is like a bubble, with nothing on the inside, and completely transparent skin. Or maybe as if the body has disappeared completely and is like inhabiting a space of our own creation. Whatever our experience of the inner space, we allow the focus of our attention to make its way gradually down to the center of our body. Not just the place where we are looking with our mind's eye, but actually as if our mind's eye has moved downwards to that central point. As if our head had completely disappeared, and all our faculties, whether it be perception, memory, thought, and cognition, have come together in a single place at the center of ourselves. So we are actually located down in our center, in the same place as our meditation object, rather than looking down on it from some place above, equivalent to where we'd expect our head to be. For some of you already acquainted with the observation technique, it's simply a question of seeing what's already there and following that without interfering, simply being attentive at the center. For those amongst you who are better versed in visualizing some sort of meditational object, it may be a visual object like that of the shining sun, or it may be a tactile object such as an imaginary invisible fruit, felt at the center, the point of the turning of the breath, on the same level as the diaphragm. Whatever our approach to keeping the mind on track at the center, we try to do so continuously, with a feather-light touch, an unbroken and exceedingly gentle attention. Bringing our attention back, if it pivots away to any other distractions around us, or following it if there is some sort of transformation in the mind. If the thoughts are few and far between, we do our best to ignore them, certainly not letting a first thought proliferate into a second or a third. Only as a last resort using the mantra, if the thoughts are really too many to deal with. So we cultivate our attention in this way, lightly and gently, each to our own practice now, for a few more moments in silence. So we continue to keep our mind on track at the center of the body the whole of the time, lightly, gently and continuously, always at the center of whatever inner experience we've built up for ourselves as a result of our meditation so far this session. For some people, the inner experience will amount to a sense of brightness at the center of oneself. For others, it may be more of a feeling, something like a sense of well-being, again centered at the seventh base. For others still, it may be images, large or small, centered around the middle of our body, sometimes small like objects, sometimes much larger like whole vistas or panoramas, where we are actually smaller than the images we see. But whatever inner experience we have, we touch our mind gently at our center, so gently that it's almost as if we're hardly touching at all. Touching with the lightness of a warm fingertip, touching the surface of some new fallen snow, touching the snow so gently that there'll be a melting away at the point of contact, where solid becomes liquid and liquid becomes vapor, spreading outwards, rarefying outwards and spreading like the ripples on the surface of a pond, ever wider from the point of contact. In this way, we extend our inner experience initially to the whole of ourselves, filling ourselves with the light or that sense of well-being, or expanding the inner picture to fill the whole of our body by a process known as the spreading of loving kindness. And we make the affirmation at the center of ourselves that may I be well and happy, free from all suffering. And then we extend the same loving kindness beyond the boundaries of our own being, outwards into the room around us, extending outwards in all directions around us, like a halo or an aura, to encapsulate all the sentient beings around us in the room where we're sitting for meditation. And we start to return some of the benefits of meditation to the world around us by making the affirmation at the center of ourselves that all the living beings here in this room be well and happy, free from suffering, and live together in peace and harmony. Further outwards to the whole building, wider to the whole neighborhood, outwards to the whole municipality and the city limits, almost as if we are extending our loving kindness across a map, seen in bird's eye view, in ever-widening circles around us, taking in all the sentient beings therein, with the wish that may all these beings be well and happy, live in peace and harmony. Especially at this time when so many people feel isolated or pinned down by negativity, we extend our loving kindness as a torrent of peace, a cool tide extending outwards to bring happiness where there is suffering, and increasing the happiness where happiness is scarce. Even wider to the whole state of California, to neighboring states, to all the lower 48 states, wider still to the whole of North America, with the wish that all living beings here on this continent be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. And wider still to all the continents of the world, as if we were extending loving kindness across the entire face of this planet, with the affirmation at the center of ourselves that may all living beings, whether on the land, in the air, or in the sea, be touched by our loving kindness, that these living beings be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony, that world peace become a reality within our own lifetimes. And we can spread loving kindness in all the 6 great directions, almost as if we were extending a beam of loving kindness outwards into the universe around us, to the front and to the back, without limits. To the right and to the left, without boundaries. Above and below, without end. Extending loving kindness to all living beings here in the universe, so that no living being, without exception, is left untouched by our loving kindness. Again, with the same wish for all living beings to be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. And for the last few moments of our practice, we can extend a loving kindness toward particular loved ones we may be thinking about by holding them close within the brightness or our sense of well-being at the center of ourselves. Thinking of their name or their face, sending loving kindness to them in particular, especially if we are separated by huge distances. Extending loving kindness to those for whom we feel a particular debt of gratitude, toward those still living, or even those who have already passed, trusting that the purity of our loving kindness can extend across the huge gulfs of space and time to reach those loved ones wherever they are to be found. We extend our loving kindness in this way for the last few moments of our practice together. Sabba Buddhanupavena, Sabba Dhammanupavena, Sabba Sankhanupavena Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, and slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gently finishing your practice. It is through practicing compassion that it really becomes easier. Although you may have great expectations about the wonders of meditation and compassion, but usually a single meditation will not solve all the problems in your life. But if you remember what you've done today, relaxing your body, relaxing your mind, focusing and repeating the mantra, if you were to practice a little of that every day, for no less than 20 minutes a day, at a time which is convenient for you, then it will become easier as time goes on. There may be good days and bad days, but on aggregate, there will be an increasing sense of calm in your life. And you'll be able to go further in your 20 minutes than was possible when you first started out. This is important for anyone who felt frustrated by their first experiences of meditation. For spreading compassion beyond ourselves, it is not easy, but we also need to keep working at it. Compassion for others never comes easy, but with practice, the circle of people for whom we have compassion will be a gradually expanding circle around you. When training yourself, it's sometimes easier to start with people for whom you already have some degree of familiarity, not just a bunch of random strangers. When learning to spread loving-kindness, some people actually start with those closest to them, for whom they feel some sort of admiration, and then they work their way towards more difficult people in their lives. But spreading loving-kindness geographically, like we practice today, is also an effective way of training yourself in compassion. As the mind becomes more fluid and flexible, something changes, meaning that you will become less quick to anger. So, to continue our examination of compassion as an antidote for being mean or selfish, in his book, The Art of Happiness, His Holiness the Dalai Lama once said that compassion helps create a positive, friendly atmosphere in the world. With a compassionate attitude, you will find it easier to initiate affection towards a positive response from other people in your relationships. It may not be certain how long it may take for that flow of goodness to come back to you, but the Dalai Lama, who is very accomplished at this sort of thing, basically taught that the art of happiness is synonymous with learning to be compassionate to others. It is not the whole story, I should hasten to add, but it is a big part of it. By initiating compassion, you open yourself up to receive much better things in your life. So that is how being compassionate to others, even if it doesn't reach the point of complete selflessness, can eventually come full circle back to you. It helps initiate that contact with others who might want to return compassion to you. So, people may have an ulterior motive for being compassionate. I'm not sure how to put a fine point on it, but doesn't it sound like a contradiction to want to help other people as a way to help yourself? Although it may sound strange, even this motivation for compassion can be accommodated, but you might call it self-serving compassion. In my own Theravada denomination of Buddhism, actually compassion is not emphasized that much. It's usually described incidentally in descriptions of other virtues. It is described incidentally because often there needs to be a balance between give and take, in a way that doesn't leave you too vulnerable to exploitation. The logic generally goes that you need to have some strength yourself first before you can save another person. If you see a non-swimmer drowning in the river, you better check first that you know how to swim before you jump in after them. Or in the words of the in-flight safety presentation, you need to fit your own oxygen mask first before helping others. Also, sometimes you need to have a resource yourself first before you can share with others. You can't give things that you don't have. It's like if you want to help charity, you need to have something in your bank account first before you can make the transfer. Sometimes, the deeper the well of compassion, the more it has to flow inward as well, in order to have strong roots of providence. So, you may think, I don't have it in me to be selfless or even share, but there's nothing to stop you doing a little bit more work on yourself first, probably a lot more work. And the other thing which some people find difficult is that because they think benign selflessness is the ultimate thing to aim for, they may be overly critical of themselves. They don't start from a position of love for themselves or compassion towards themselves. Consequently, they keep beating themselves up about how imperfect they are, to the point that they have nothing left over to share with anyone else anymore. Some of us are very critical of ourselves. We have very high standards that we try to live up to, but when we fail, we feel bad about ourselves. So, part of compassion is having a realistic sort of outlook about yourself and where you are going. And this is particularly why having a way to work on ourselves to become better is both hopeful and refreshing. Further up the scale of devotion to compassion, you come across more selfless acts. For a parent and a child, well, it's pretty easy to understand how you are really doing something for another person. Within the Buddhist faith tradition, not so much my own denomination, which tends to emphasize more solitary introspection, but more in the sense of the reformed Buddhist tradition of the Dalai Lama, known as the Mahayana school of Buddhism, compassion is really emphasized quite a lot. In the Mahayana, it is almost as if by serving other people, by being selfless in other words, you discover who you truly are. So by giving of yourself, you discover who you truly are. The more you can sacrifice for others, the more worth you have, maybe in the eyes of others, but certainly on a cosmic level. There are some really quite dramatic stories in ancient scriptures about acts of compassion. Some of them seem quite amazing, maybe even legendary, and in my own tradition, what is quite startling is that it is not only people who are on the receiving end of such compassion, but even animals. Sometimes people explain compassion only as applying to fellow human beings, but within Buddhist tradition, the definition goes much further to extend to all sentient beings, because animals also have suffering and fear in their lives. So, being kind to animals is also a valid expression of compassion. This doesn't mean huge, spectacular acts of compassion towards animals, although the examples I've prepared are fairly dramatic. The first example of a Buddhist saint who was once walking in meditation beside a cliff edge, and please don't try that at home, and down below him he saw a hungry tigress who was so thin that her ribcage was showing through her skin. Obviously, she had not eaten for a long time, and yet she was having to produce the milk to suckle her young tiger cubs. In desperation, she was thinking to herself, if I were to eat one of my cubs, I would have the nutrients to produce the milk to let the remaining cubs survive. The saint, walking for meditation up on the cliff, saw what she was intending, through the power of mind reading that you can do if you are an expert in meditation. And he thus decided, it is better that I throw myself to my death at the foot of the cliff so that the tigress can eat me rather than having to destroy her own offspring. And thinking that, he threw himself over the cliff to land at her feet. So a selfless act of compassion, even for a hungry animal. A second traditional story is more dramatic still. I wonder if you are up for it. Well, it may be too graphic an example for some viewers. There once was a monk called Asanga. Being an expert meditator, he went off to meditate and meditate and meditate in a cave in the wilderness. So he was a solitary meditator in a cave, cut off from society, and his motivation was that he reckoned that by meditating like this, he would really be able to meet with his Savior by the ultimate sacrifice of meditating in a cave. However, after many years of meditation, he found that he had still not made any progress towards finding his Savior. For many years, there was no special sign that he was getting any further along his spiritual path, until eventually there was this mangy dog which turned up on the doorstep or whatever you have at the cave entrance and started to look at Asanga longingly, like he might be able to help. And being a mangy stray dog, it had a lot of sores. The monk Asanga in the cave saw that the sores on the dog's skin were caused by maggots eating away at the dog's skin. So Asanga thought to himself, is this a sign that I have been waiting for? Maybe what I need to do is not just meditate a lot, but to show compassion for this poor, unfortunate animal. So he tried to help the dog the only way he knew, but he saw the wounds on the dog were so tender that probably the only way he was going to really be able to help the dog was by getting up real close. And when he got closer, he saw that not only did the dog have sores, but there were a lot of maggots on the sores. And then he started to feel sorry, not just for the dog, but also for the maggots, because even maggots have got their self-respect, right? So, how do you get a maggot out of a dog wound without hurting the maggot? If you pull it too hard with your fingers, then it will snap in two. So he actually had to lick the maggots out of the wounds in the dog. Are you up for that sort of compassion yet? Not quite there yet? It gets worse, okay? He felt so sorry for the maggots that they were not going to have anything to eat anymore, that he actually put them on his own skin so they could continue to feed. At which point, the mangy dog turned into the Buddha. So, a happy ending, okay? But the point is that sometimes just doing more and more meditation without thinking about the well-being of any other person or being can be a dead end. But if you have compassion hand in hand with meditation, by sharing compassion with others, you establish a flow of goodness, which will somehow feed back into your long-term spiritual journey. Compassion in all its forms needs to be understood in its proper context. Although ideally, all people in the world might aspire to have unconditional compassion, but it may also be easy to forget that compassion needs to be balanced by a sense of justice. In a sense, you can't have justice without compassion, in the same way you can't have compassion without justice. A balance needs to be struck. If you are naively compassionate by becoming a complete doormat to other people, although it may be considered compassionate, it opens the door to certain unsavory characters in society who will be all too ready to take advantage of you. So there is a sense of trying to strike a balance between compassion and justice. Compassion needs to be seen in context. We can't afford to be too naive in the way we practice compassion. An overview of Buddhist teachings sometimes talks about wisdom coming together with compassion as being the two wings that allow the practitioner to fly towards freedom and spiritual perfection. If you have compassion but no wisdom, then you will just keep flying round and around in circles. Meditation tends to provide the wisdom side, giving you the understanding to see more deeply into the problems, rather than just sympathizing with people's problems. However, if you spread the meditation you have practiced by loving kindness, you will cultivate the compassionate side of yourself. There are also many other things you can practice in your everyday life in order to cultivate compassion and test the level of compassion you have already attained. For example, if your friend calls you up with the news that their house has just been robbed, what would be your first reaction to the news? What will be the first thing you say to them? Some people might ask, "Are you okay?" or say, "I'm sorry," or "Do you need anything?" or maybe they'll say, "I'm on my way." All these answers are coming from a place of compassion. Another sort of person might ask in a bit more of a pragmatic way, "Did they take anything?" or "Did you call the cops?" because they want to make sure those thieves are punished. The pragmatist thinking is, "I'm not going to let them get away with that," or were the stolen items insured? Sometimes completely forgetting about their friend's feelings. But what I'm getting at is that there are two ways people can respond. Both of them are completely valid. In some cases, you need both in order to be a good friend to them, to make sure they are okay and taken care of. But the other side is that we have got to do something about this, protecting their possessions when they are off their game. You really need to have both. Compassion is important, but it's not the whole story. The whole thing about being a zero-sum game is that although it may be very compassionate by nature, sometimes you need to complement it with that other part to make sure you're not going too far out on a limb and leaving yourself vulnerable. So, the pragmatist whose first reaction is, "Oh, I'll get the cops, get out of my way," that would be going too far to the other extreme. There's also a lack of compassion there, so you really need to develop both sides of your interaction with people. Some people find one side of the interaction easier than the other. Within the system known as psychological type, one sort of person is characterized as having a feeling preference, that is, the more compassionate ones, or on the other side, as having a thinking preference, in other words, the pragmatists. If you have a quick look at these preferences, maybe you can see where you lie on the scale, because generally everyone is either one or the other. I should say up front that generally the womenfolk tend to fall more on the feeling side. This is not a sexist observation, but a statistical one, and it's said to be attributable mostly to the expectations of our society. So if a woman doesn't conform with the compassion stereotypes, she tends to get accused of all sorts of things. So, thinkers are more guided by objective logic, cause and effect, and flaws in logic. They like principles in dealing with people, and at work they like to focus on productivity. By contrast, the feelers are guided by personal values. They are more compassionate, in other words, they don't feel they have to have reasons to justify their personal values. They tend to focus on harmony with others. Whether an issue is right or wrong is not as important as making sure that in the end everyone is happy. They tend to look for common ground, especially in arbitration or in a negotiation. They like to treat each person as an individual case, especially if they are downtrodden people. And feelers in the workplace tend to regard the product of the work as less important than the work as having job satisfaction, harmony, and being fulfilled at the end of the day. In conclusion, I would like to say that meditators, especially in the Dhammakaya tradition, are generally stronger on feeling and tend to be more mystical in their outlook on life. Sometimes they are people who have had religious experiences, and perhaps, unsurprisingly, the majority are female. The other sort of practitioners, the thinkers, who are maybe more challenged to be compassionate, tend to be more ambitious in their workplace dreams and tend to be more intellectual in their spirituality. But whatever the balance of your personality, the artfulness in applying compassion is to find a balance. However hard or easy we find compassion, it is something we cannot do without, because all of us at some time in our life are going to depend on it. As I said for generosity in my previous session, we come into the world empty-handed and therefore rely on the compassion of others. So, in a sense, compassion makes the world go round in terms of a humane society. It is something that is important for all of us, whether we are thinkers or feelers. We need to find an artful way to cultivate compassion in our lives. And I hope that what you've learned from the session today will help you to make compassion more substantial in your life and prove a useful way forward in terms of balance to have a deeper well of compassion within yourselves. So let me finish up with a couple of news updates, one about temple support and the other my usual PSA about the availability of meditation teaching in English. At the moment, as you probably know, despite a certain relaxation in the social distancing regulations in LA County, California, we are still in the purple tier. Accordingly, the activities of the temple are still pretty much limited to those we can share online, as the temple buildings remain closed to the public, with no monks going outside the temple gates and no community members coming into the temple building until the risk of the pandemic has passed. Exceptionally, for this fortnight of November 8 to 21st, because the monks and staff at the temple will be on an internal meditation retreat, if anyone wishes to bring food to the temple during that period, please phone Crystal first, and the number is 626-991-6958, and a member of the staff will come to collect the food from you at the temple gate in place of the usual monk receiving offerings. In the meantime, although all of us hope that the present situation will not go on too long, the silver lining for the crisis is that there are additional ways in which temple devotees can show their support for the temple without attending in person. If it's not convenient for you to visit the temple, don't fret, as you can still make a donation to help keep the temple lights on by mailing checks to the temple address or by making a bank transfer. Online transfers can be made by Venmo or Zelle. The special merits arising for those practicing generosity in these times of adversity are that you will have a life free of obstacles and danger, you will gain mastery of all forms of knowledge, prosper in your duties, have special insight into Dhamma teachings, attain purity with ease, breaking free of the defilements in the mind. You will gain wealth on worldly, spiritual, and transcendental levels, allowing you to pursue perfections with ease, all the way to the attainment of the utmost Dharma, and the whole temple would like to rejoice in your merits on this occasion. Meditation is particularly valuable in this COVID era to help us cope with the dysphoria of the new normal. And in this respect, here at the temple, although there are still no face-to-face teaching sessions for the interim, you can access Dhamma teachings in English at the YouTube channel called Peace Point Meditation or the Facebook page of Peace Point Meditation, either live on Thursday evenings and Sunday mornings or on demand after the event. For those of you who have been following my talks, you may be interested to subscribe to a YouTube channel which I have recently set up in my own name, which can be found by searching for Phra Nicholas Thanissaro on YouTube, where I have systematized my own teachings and cut them down to the bare essentials. Meanwhile, Peace Breaks are broadcast every evening between 7 and 8 p.m. from Friday to Wednesday. Please note that the new later broadcast time for the Thursday evening Peace Time, which is now 6 till 7 p.m. For the benefit of families listening in, there's also a special show for children in English known as Shining Stars that goes out between 7:30 and 8 p.m. every Monday evening, with bedtime stories and meditation short enough to keep the attention of younger listeners. Outside of the live streams and on-demand programming, there's also the Mind Gem app, which you can download for free, allowing you to listen to meditation and Dhamma talks in English on your cell phone, even when you are offline. So, this session we have looked at the topic of the art of compassion. And for my next session online with you, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning and a week on Thursday evening, we'll be moving on to look at the subject of give forgiveness, get peace. For good measure, I would like to remind viewers that even better than posting thank you or great talk or sadhu in the broadcast comments, you can email your questions about meditation or what you have heard in the lecture to the address as you can see spelled out on the slide, and I will do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to stay healthy, avoid recklessness or complacency in the face of the virus, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Try to practice compassion in balance with wisdom to overcome any residual meanness or selfishness in your mind. So today, this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for this session. So long, folks, and stay safe.